Hi, everyone. Welcome to Deep Health and Patient Care. Today, we're going to talk about environmental factors to consider in physical therapy. We want to start by defining deep health. So, deep health is sort of this zoned out, all encompassing view of what makes someone healthy. It has 6 elements, as you can see here: relational, physical, emotional, environmental, mental, and existential. So, not all of these areas are going to be talked about today, and obviously, some of these definitely fall outside of our scope of practice. But I think there's some things that we don't always consider that we can start to consider with people that affect how they feel. So specifically today, we want to talk about stress, nutrition, and sleep, and then ways in which we can help our patients navigate those areas of their life in conjunction with their physical therapy. So before we really dive into it, I thought this quote was pretty appropriate for today. A comfort zone is a beautiful place, but nothing grows there. So I know that a lot of this information that I'm going to go over today is outside of what a lot of people might view as their scope of practice or their comfort level. So I would just challenge you to go into this with a bit of a growth mindset, knowing that some of this is going to take you getting your elbows dirty and knowing that it won't be perfect in terms of the interactions that you are going to have with patients when discussing this content. And that's okay. Like it doesn't have to always be perfect. None of us were great therapists when we first graduated from PT school, but day in and day out habits and practices has made all of us a lot better therapists. And so some of these areas that we're going to talk about can definitely have a profound impact on not only you yourself, but how your patients as well and how they feel. So everything we go through today will each sort of area, stress, nutrition, and sleep, will have at the end a little bit of a self-breakout where you are going to work through some of these areas on your own, which is going to require some introspection. And then you're almost going to kind of treat yourself as if you are your patient and then come up with some ways that you could start to make your patient, which is you, your life better. And so kind of looking at the sort of profound effect we can have on someone's life, not only from a traditional physical therapy standpoint. There's a patient in Owensboro whose name is Josh, who has been working with Suzanne Leach for about 2 years, and then myself for about a year. Josh is a military veteran. He has Crohn's disease and a history of hernias. Really a pretty complicated medical history, both physically and mentally. And so he had been working with Suzanne and feeling quite a bit better. And I think Suzanne kind of started to realize and say, hey, Josh, I think that you could benefit from working with Kevin in terms of some nutritional counseling. Josh had mentioned that he had gained weight since leaving the military. And so Suzanne just didn't quite feel comfortable with that, knowing Josh's medical history. And so basically continuing to work with Suzanne over the past 18 months and then sort of also adding in the nutritional component. Josh has now lost about 30 pounds. And he also hasn't had a surgery now for over a year. And so that may not sound like that big of a deal for a lot of people, but this is the first time in the past 6 years of Josh's life that he hasn't had any kind of surgery. He hasn't had any emergency trips to Vanderbilt resulting in any procedures. And so Josh has stated kind of over and over again to myself and Suzanne that, the past 18 months of his life have been the best that they've been in the past 6 years because of RPI. And so it's the stories that you hear like that make you realize that some of this stuff can really have a profound impact on how people feel. And so I think that you can kind of look at, it's not just your patients who maybe aren't getting better the way that you would expect, that some of this could be really, really helpful to them, but also to people who you've helped them get better, but you know that their health is more than just their shoulder feeling better inside of a 8 or 12 week window of physical therapy, and that there's a lot of other areas where you may be able to help them start to feel a lot better. both physically, mentally, in kind of more aspects of their life. And so we'll start by talking about stress. And we want to define stress as allostatic load. So allostatic load was a term that was new to me about 3 or 4 months ago. And so it's defined as the combined amount of good stress and bad stress in our lives. And so this can be complex and not always easy to recognize, because some of the same things that are good stress can also be bad stress. So 2 easy examples are kids. I think everyone knows, or everyone who has kids is very aware that they can be simultaneously the best part of your life and the worst part of your day. Another good example is exercise. We see people who we wish they exercised more, because that would be good stress. They would feel better even if they would just go walk 20 minutes a day. We've also seen the distance runner who is training for a marathon for the first time and just won't give it up, and their training load is far too high, and they end up with these overuse injuries, or maybe they've really gone kind of way far with it, and then they've fallen into this kind of chronic fatigue or overtraining scenario. And so when considering where the stress comes from in our life, it can be complex, it can be complicated. And so this sort of stress web gives a lot of different examples of where someone could be feeling stress in their life. And so it's important to realize that people aren't always aware of where the stress is coming from if you just ask them in real time. Sometimes it takes a little bit of introspection or critical thinking to realize, like this is causing me stress and sort of ramping up my sympathetic nervous system, and I wasn't aware of that. And so there's a technique in meditation that they use called naming and noting. And so I'm going to pull up a little YouTube video where some people from Headspace kind of talk about naming and noting and how they use it in meditation. And then we'll come back and talk about how you can apply that to working with a patient, manage some stress in their life.
Sometimes, when we're meditating and we realize the mind's wandered off, we might not know how to react. Noting gives us some very clear direction, perhaps a greater sense of clarity and confidence. In that moment, we pause and identify the nature of distraction. Oh yeah, thinking, or feeling. Having noted, there's a sense of having dealt with it. This makes it easier to let go of the distraction and gently return to the object of focus. And when it happens again, which it will, we simply apply the same approach, gently noting the nature of the distraction. Now, when we begin noting, the temptation is to try and catch every single thought and feeling, but that quickly becomes tiring. We only need note the distraction when we realize that we've been lost in thought, and even then, it's a very gentle acknowledgement. Imagine it a little less like whack-a-mole and a little more like a feather, softly being placed on a fine crystal glass. So noting is when we recognize the mind has wandered. We acknowledge it, gently note the nature of distraction, let it go, and then effortlessly return to the object of focus.
So we take that naming and noting technique from meditation, and we try to apply that to our real life by helping people say, okay, as you're going about your day and you're noticing stress from whatever reason, it's helpful to step back and sort of just breathe, and then also just name the situation for what it is and note that you may or may not be in control of how it's going or the outcome. But just the awareness is very helpful for people feel like they're more in charge of the situation, and that they can recognize that their own personal kind of response to that situation may or may not be appropriate. So we talked earlier about not everyone is going to have as much stress as we need in certain situations, but the majority of people are going to kind of fall on this sort of wrong side of the bell curve of starting to freak out and crash and burn. So I think that's easy for us if you just relate it to your schedule at work with patient care. So if you start to book people in your out time in order to kind of be more accommodating to them, it quickly can go from the I'm rocking it to I'm starting to freak out. And if that continues over, several weeks, several months, then we can start to see where burnout happens for physical therapists. And so that would be a situation for ourselves where we work on, okay, you are in control of that. How do you start to set up boundaries for yourself and be respectful of yourself to help you move back towards that sort of leveling off at the top? I'm rocking it. My schedule is mostly full. And so for your patients, that might mean helping them understand boundaries that they set up in life, whether it be with friends and family or with their work schedule or whatever else they may have going on. So the other side of the coin there is they need more stress. In the graphic, they're the I'm so bored, moving on to starting to get my attention. And so, again, that all of these areas of stress, when you consider from the stress web, it may be exercise, it may be their nutrition, but if you can just get them started, kind of rolling, then that sort of takes on its own sort of snowball effect where, you just recommend, hey, maybe if you just took the stairs every day, or maybe if you just at lunch, take 45 minutes to eat and take the next 15 minutes to just go outside and walk around. They start to feel like they're more active, they're getting some sunlight, and so that kind of helps kind of with the uptick there in the right direction. So where do we start with the client that needs more stress? Some basic things that we can start with are like set effective goals, meaning find what you want to do, kind of see if you can write that down, verbalize it, and make it something that's measurable. Start with one action each day. Like, what can you do day in and day out that's not too much to ask of yourself, but also helps you kind of move in the right direction towards the goal that you want to work towards? How are you going to track progress? How are you going to know things are working in the right direction for you? And then meet with a professional. And so the professional is you. And literally the last part is the most important one, because meeting with a professional comes with accountability. And really what people want, even though they may not know they want or need it, is they need someone that sort of holds them accountable and can help them problem solve and work through the changes they're trying to make. And so this sort of set goals, one action plan, track your progress, that's actually exactly how you'll work with someone with trying to make nutritional changes as well. It's just the most effective way to basically create change. Now, going the other direction, the client that needs less stress. So we think that far more people are probably going to fall into this category. And so some of the helpful things there are practicing parasympathetic activities, practicing meditation, balancing your exercise routine, getting outside, and practicing self-compassion. And so practicing sympathetic activities, what does that mean? That can look a lot of different ways. Here's a list that you can try to suggest to someone. And so it can be as simple as walking outside. It can be as much as, deep breathing, which doesn't take really any time at all. Having them just say, okay, why don't you just take your phone, set a timer for 1 minute, close your eyes, and just see if you can diaphragmatically breathe and sort of not only bring your heart rate down, but kind of mellow things out. And so you do need to kind of remember that, like, this may take some encouragement, and like anything, you don't know until you try it. So you may have some resistance from patients in terms of them thinking like, okay, well, that's not going to help, or that's not going to make me feel any different. And so in a sort of gentle way, just having that conversation with them, saying, well, yeah, maybe it won't, but maybe it will. And so you never know if anything's going to work or not until you try. And all of these things are very, very low risk, very high reward. And so I would encourage you to just try it and see how it makes you feel, and kind of prove me wrong. And if it doesn't work, then so be it. And so having that sort of felt sense can make the activity and experience far more meaningful if and when they do feel different. You'll see mindfulness meditation listed there, and so there are a lot of good apps now available in the App Store or Google Play if you're an Android user. So some of the most popular ones are Calm and Headspace. There's also one called Encounter. It's Christian meditations. So depending on the type of individual, I did have a patient not too long ago that I recommended meditation for them, and it's sort of conflicted with, I think, a little bit their kind of belief system. And so luckily Shelley Tyler knew about Encounter, which is Christian based. I personally use Headspace and have for a couple of years now. It's all of these are pretty robust now in terms of there's a lot of different areas even that the meditation can kind of be focused towards, meaning it could be based on performance or based on financial stress or a number of different things. And so a lot of them will give you free trials for 7 days or 2 weeks. So it's helpful to kind of get their feet wet again and just say, jump in, try to do it every single day, and see where it gets you. In terms of your exercise routine, it's important. We know it's important to balance that. So what does that look like? I would say in a perfect world, it's a mix of strength training, cardio, and low intensity recovery. Again, that doesn't have to look the same for everybody. What you need to enjoy doing what you're doing. That's the best way that it's going to stick and become a habit that is long term. And so we all know that your exercise doesn't need to be all at once. It just needs to be habitual and consistent. Like anything, that's where you're going to sort of make the most progress. Another great area of opportunity for overall health and specifically stress relief is getting outside. I want to talk about an experiment where they took 3 groups of people who normally work in an office without a window. They were given a choice of doing mentally demanding tasks, but they had 3 different options for what would be basically behind their desk. And so one option was a blank wall, one option was a plasma TV with an outdoor scene, and one scenario was the glass window showing the same exact outdoor scene that was portrayed on the plasma TV. So to make it as realistic as possible, they actually took the plasma TV, turned it on its side, put curtains up beside it to make it look like a window, mimicking the exact same thing you would have seen had you been looking out the actual window. So they followed these people for 16 weeks and measured physical, mental, and emotional state. And what they found is the glass window basically provided the most restorative view, meaning that when the people gazed out the window, they calmed down, but they also scored higher on these physical, mental, and emotional scores at the end of the study. And so I wanted to share that because I think that's important to understand that what we may think is the appropriate dose is probably bigger than it actually is, meaning that it may not need to be something as grand as going for a 1-hour walk through the woods. It might be something as simple as recommending, hey, how about in between meetings or before or after lunch, take a little block of time, maybe 10, 15 minutes, and just go walk a block around your building that you work in. Or, in the time between when you get home and you have things to do at home after work, take 10 minutes in your backyard, walk around, play with your kids, play with your dog, or don't do anything. Sometimes, Winnie the Pooh said it best, sometimes doing nothing is the very best of something. So just putting your phone down, and it's good on so many levels, not just stress, even in terms of our eyesight. Like, we're on screens for so much time during the day generally, and that's not how really our eyes are meant to work. So even just taking the time to, like the study said, look out, take time to just gaze out the window and really, like, don't think of anything, just kind of daydream even. It's really little stuff like that that really can have an effect on somebody's mood and their kind of general mental state. Another thing, practicing self-compassion. And so what that looks like is asking for help or support when you need it. Getting a coach, again, that would be you if you feel stuck. Getting counseling if you feel helpless. So that would be the type of scenario I think that most of us have encountered, where you think, this patient has like something mentally deeper than what I feel comfortable even sort of scratching the surface on. And that would be a situation where you definitely refer out. Knowing your own personal limits and honoring them. So thinking back to the example with work and our own patient schedules, and how it's important to, really put up the guardrails on that out time and take that seriously. Not letting that sort of spill over into your own time. And then, sort of like we just talked about, unplugging once a week. So your weekends are probably going to be your best opportunity for that, or if you have a full day off during the week. It doesn't have to be a full day. It could be for an hour, it could be for 30 minutes. So, whatever time you have there. And so, from a research perspective, research from neuroscience and psychology shows that people who practice self-compassion get more done and are able to sustain their work better than those who don't. So again, pretty powerful, I think, when you sit down and think about that, in terms of, you take two groups of people, you try to give them the same tasks, try to give them the same stuff to kind of work towards, and the people who are basically practicing being nice to themselves, to put it simply, they do better. And so self-compassion is a little more than just being nice to yourself. So, what is it? Like, it's easy to say practice self-compassion, but then you don't really know. Someone may not know, like, I don't know what that is. They may say, I don't know how to be nice to myself. And so it's broken down into three categories. You have self-kindness, you have a common humanity, and you have mindfulness. And so self-kindness, I think, is the most obvious here. It is, the act of being kind to yourself. And that doesn't mean excusing like every foolish decision you make or anything that goes wrong as being like, oh, well, that's okay, I don't got to worry about that. It's more of a conscious attitude towards kindness. So being understanding and nurturing to yourself, and trying not to be harshly critical or judgmental. And so I think a good way to think about self-kindness is to think of a loving parent or a wise counselor to yourself. So you are the wise counselor to yourself. You're honest and as clear-eyed as can be about your faults and mistakes, but you're accepting, you're tolerant, and charitable about them while seeking to do better. So it's not that self-indulgence or self-destructive pleasure-seeking behavior, but instead just being honest and saying, okay, I realize that I came up short there, but I can definitely do better. A really good example of this, I have a patient who she has had a hip surgery that didn't go so well. She responds okay to therapy, but doesn't get a lot of carryover. And so we had the difficult conversation that her weight could be playing in, and she was very accepting to that idea, so then we started to talk, and she basically said, I think I've done really well in almost every area of my life except for weight loss. Weight loss is the one area that I've put my foot down before and not had long-term success. I've been really, really restrictive in the past and had success, but that success wasn't sustainable, it didn't stick, and gained all of that weight back and then a little more, which is a very common theme you'll hear for people who yo-yo diet. So we talked and talked. We actually spent about 3 months with me kind of generally recommending small habits for her to take off and try. Honestly, we came back sort of month after month, literally for 3 months, and no weight was lost. And then again, we kind of sat down for a longer session. Instead of just talking about this in her therapy session, we actually took a whole session to talk just about the nutritional side of things, and dug a little deeper. And she, what sort of tipped me off to this was she basically I saw her early in the week for therapy, and then we were going to meet Thursday afternoon to talk about the nutrition side of things. And she said, oh yeah, I'll save it in my phone, Fat Camp with Kevin. And so instantly kind of triggered my awareness to say, okay, so if she's coming into this situation with that sort of preconceived thought of this is Fat Camp, you can only imagine what else she tells herself that she wouldn't tell anyone else. And so that Thursday afternoon, we basically spent 40 minutes talking about self-compassion and what that is and what that looks like for her. And so what that looks like for her is not calling herself a fat ass, because that's what she would do commonly when she was eating, and when she knew that she was eating poorly, or just eating a meal that, like going out to eat and being like, oh, well, I don't really need this, but I'm going to finish it anyways. And so she had the very next week lost 2 pounds, and the very next week after that, another 2 pounds. And so that's a very incremental change, but it's a good one. And it was the most consistent success she had since starting anything nutrition related. So just really, really effective intervention there of thinking, hey, I want you to go home. I want you to practice being compassionate towards yourself. And so what I physically had her do was basically write down one nice thing about herself on a Post-it note, and she had to say that out loud to herself every day. And so again, you would probably get some pushback from people that say, that's dumb, I'm not doing that. But if you have them practice doing something like that, they will feel different. So the second part is common humanity, and that means that you realize that it's not just you, that everyone has challenges, makes mistakes, everyone feels down or inadequate at some times. So you can see yourself as part of a larger whole in this instance, rather than one isolated person who is going through this alone. And so that helps you to avoid the kind of poor me pitfall of self-indulgence, saying that I've had a bad day, no one else is having a bad day, everyone looks so happy on social media, I'm going to just treat myself however I want. And honestly, a good example of this is I have a nutritional client, Rachel, who we were talking, and she wants to lose weight. That is one of her goals, but she doesn't really want to weigh herself. That is actually kind of common thing I hear especially from female clients, is that weighing themselves on the scale gives them anxiety, so they like to avoid that. Basically that method of measurement, and instead would rather lean on something like just reporting how clothes feel, or buying a size down in a t-shirt and being the goal being I'm going to get into that t-shirt. And so this actually came up in a talk we were having, where she had mentioned the desire to lose weight. I kind of talked to her about how weight loss usually looks, and she basically said, I would rather not weigh. And I said, oh, that's okay. A lot of the females that I work with don't want to do that. And she was immediately, you could see just kind of a stress lift off her shoulders, and her facial expression changed. And she said, like, wow, that makes me feel really good to hear that I'm not the only one who doesn't like doing that. And so just an example there of the way that we feel seems very personal, because it is, but also know that there are other people who likely feel the same way we do in a number of different situations. And so, lastly here, mindfulness, just a state of non-judgmental, conscious awareness and self-observation. So again, this is you're trying to step back and assess a specific situation or how a day or a week or maybe even a month has been going, and just kind of say, all right, I'm going to, take an unbiased sort of approach to this and just step back and look at it and see, maybe this is how things are right now. This is definitely not how things are likely always going to be. And so just being more aware of how things are going. So I've provided a sort of a handout here that is attached in the email, and I want to cover just a few of these. It's just a list of what is compassion versus what is not compassion. And so we'll just go over a few of them. I want to start with one. Being kind to yourself is compassion. Letting yourself off the hook, not compassion. And so I think if you just told me those two things, you might be apt to say those are the same, but I'm going to kind of tell you how they're not. Again, thinking back to Candy's situation, I talked to her about, you need to think of when you're in these situations and you feel like you've kind of lost control, or you just want to give up on the week, even though it's just Thursday, and kind of tell yourself, oh, well, I'll just start back on Monday. You don't need to let yourself off the hook for the rest of the weekend. What you need to do is sort of be kind to yourself in the sense that know what is right for your body and what you need to do in order to meet the goals that you say you have. And so you can change things in real time or later that day. You don't have to wait until the next week or until the next month or, until the new year even. And so another one, having crucial conversations and saying difficult things when you need to is compassionate, whereas being nice, aka a doormat because you're afraid of conflict, is not. And so I think for therapists, this is another good example, is how we treat our schedule and our out time, and sort of putting up those guardrails and being very forward with patients and upfront and saying, oh, I can't schedule at that time because that's my out time. Even if it's 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, they may not understand why you're not working, but that is your time. And so sometimes you have to just be a little bit, I wouldn't say confrontational, but just firm in your delivery. Whether that be, again, with a patient about your out time, or with a patient like why they aren't compliant with whatever it is that you've prescribed them, any type of stuff like that. Again, the more that you kind of have these conversations or even practice these conversations before you have them, it can be helpful. And then the one at the very bottom here, focusing on the process. So again, that's what we talked about before at the very beginning of this, when I said kind of going into this entire presentation with a growth mindset. And so consistently trying to live in according to your deeper values and principles, but accepting that it won't be perfect. So again, we just have to get our elbows dirty sometimes and get in there and try to see how it goes, and then sort of adapt on the fly and get better at it. And so being not compassionate toward yourself would be just focusing on the outcome, on whether you got it right according to an external standard. So again, you may look at someone else in the field and say, oh, well, I'm not them. So if I can't be them right now, there's no way that I could be as good as them ever in the future. And so we know that that's just not true. The more that you practice anything, you're going to get better at it. That's how our neurobiology and neuroplasticity work. So to finish up with this section, we're going to do a little introspection for ourselves. There's 2 worksheets provided in the email. One is the wheel of stress. One is the sphere of control. And so we're going to practice it on ourselves so that we can see what it's like to go through it. That way, when we have a client or a patient go through it, we can kind of share our experience and then help them sort of navigate this process of change. And so what you'll do first is you'll use the wheel of stress worksheet to see which aspect of your own life might need a little more attention So what you'll do is you'll start from the center and you'll work outwards, and you'll fill in more of the triangle for the areas of your life that you may feel like you're struggling in or could use more attention. And so again, think back to the bell curve of sort of that happy medium of not enough stress at the top, rocking it, or working into that burnt out end of the curve. And so if you have very little shading in one area, that area could use more stress. And then if one triangle is almost or all the way full, then that area might need a little more attention. And how do we bring that down? And so I want you to take two areas from the wheel. It can be one that's on the low end or two that are on the high end or whatever it may be. And you're going to take that area and apply that to this sphere of control worksheet. So from there, you'll basically take whichever area you've picked from the wheel of stress and break that down and say, all right, in terms of this portion of my life, what areas do I have total control of? What do I have some control of? And what do I have no control of? And so we want to start with, if you're going to make changes, you can start from the inside out saying, what do you have total control of? Start there. Or you can also work from the outside in, meaning if you have no control of that, being mindful, being aware of that, and sort of letting that go, just accepting that those parts of my life are likely going to be what they're going to be, so I can change my attitude toward them, or I can start with the total control and I can change that to change the outcome that I'm looking for. So again, you want to just start easy, start with one single habit, make it something that they can do 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 times, and see if they can do that consistently. And then you use an outcome-based approach and say, okay, well, are we moving in the right direction? So you'll have quite a bit of time here. So take a break, fill those out, see what you get. Hey everybody, welcome back. I hope that you found that little exercise helpful and introspective for yourself, and then help you become aware of how you can help clients manage their stress in the future. So next we'll talk about how we help people navigate nutritional changes. So where do we start? We're going to start with the initial assessment and triage questionnaire, which was attached in the email. I can't tell you enough how important this single document is for helping me find out where patients currently are and where we're going to start with. It provides a wealth of information into how they feel about their current status, what's important to them moving forward, what changes they would like to make, and then sort of their readiness to make those changes. And it really helps me let them guide the decision making, and I can sort of meet them where they're at. And usually through talking through this, you can start to see and figure out someone's nutritional age, and then from there you can sort of find a habit that works for them. And so we'll use the term nutritional age. What does that mean? One, it's what you know. Two, it's what you do. And most importantly, it's what you can do consistently. So I think it's critical with everyone that you meet them where they are. If I was going to relate this to running, it would look like if someone came in the door who had no experience with exercise and they said, hey, I want to run a mile. We would just start with a walking program. And then from there, we would start to build that up and say, all right, once you've been able to walk a mile, then see if you can start to add in these little 20, 30-second spurts of jogging, and then we'll build those out until you can eventually run a full mile. It wouldn't be, okay, well, let's go to the track and let's do 200s and 400s, and then we'll build it out from there. That would be starting somewhere that they're definitely not ready for. And so really nutrition isn't any different than that. I wouldn't ask a new client to come in and say, hey, count your calories and your macros for 2 weeks, bring that in, we'll review that, and then I'll kind of write up a meal plan for you and tell you how to eat. I might ask them to keep a 3-day food log to see where they currently are and get some insight into how they currently eat. But most people just want to feel better, so it doesn't have to be so complicated as to counting calories, counting the carbohydrates. Again, they just want to feel better. It's our kind of job to find out why they want to feel better and then meet them where they are and help them along that journey. And so when we're working through that and we want to know where to start, you talk through the initial assessment and triage questionnaire, And honestly, someone will likely say out loud to you where they want to start without knowing that they just told you where they want to start. That's how I usually, once we're at the end of that packet, we definitely already have, basically, they've said, this is what I think I need to work on the most. And so there's probably a reason that they haven't started there yet, and I would say that that reason is the critical variable. So it's a key step in a process, and it either makes everything go or prevents it from going. So again, you think of it like a log that gets stuck and causes a log jam. If you can take that one log and remove it, then the rest of everything gets flowing downstream and everything kind of works from there. So for instance, let's say you have someone who they would say they would like to meal prep, but they don't know how to cook. So their culinary skills might be their critical variable. So from there, we would need to make something very small and actionable, a habit that they can consistently do. And so what that might look like is, okay, let's find 2 sort of go-to meals that you're comfortable with making, so that you can start to build a meal plan around those things. Or it might be something as simple as, hey, why don't we see about trying one new recipe each weekend when you have some extra free time, and saying, hey, why don't you follow the recipe and cook that dish? So when we're doing that, how do we start to make lasting change? And I think this has been really insightful for me, is going from outcome-based, avoid, and performance goals towards habit, approach, and mastery goals. So I've given some examples here that you can see. An outcomes-based goal might be lose 10 pounds. The habit goal for that would be, hey, walk 10 minutes a day. So you can see where there's a lot of different ways to get to lose 10 pounds. The habit goal of walk 10 minutes today, that's very actionable and measurable, and they can kind of check the box saying, all right, I did that today, and you want to do that every day. So an avoid goal, don't eat junk food. An approach goal, let's prepare delicious and healthy lunches instead. Take some thought out of it. A performance goal, cook a 4-course meal. A mastery goal, hey, just practice cooking like one new thing each week. Just, go to the grocery store, go to the produce section, pick something out that you've never tried, find some ways to cook it. So these type of goals, they're really, really effective because they make the client feel like they're in charge. And so they help set like realistic expectations, because they put an emphasis on hard work, they put an emphasis on growth, day-to-day progress, and they can start to help break things that are intimidatingly large into small, manageable pieces. So I call that chunking it down. And that sets the client up for long-term success, because things really start to stick and it boosts their intrinsic motivation. And so if it's meaningful to them, it is very, very important, because that will help them not only self-regulate, but also build self-esteem. And so when we're setting these goals, again, we want to make sure they kind of meet that ready, willing, and able criteria. And if they're not prepared to go there on something, then let them sort of guide where they would like to go, something they are ready to do. And again, any goal needs to meet a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 on the ready, willing, and able criteria scale, you would say. And so if it's a 7 or if it's an 8, you need to revise it until it's a 9 or a 10. And so that might mean sort of scaling it back, making it smaller, but you kind of want the client to say like, okay, I can definitely do that. And if they can go so far as to say like that goes too easy, then I would say, okay, good, well, show me that you can do it. So again, touching on what we touched on before, self-compassion, it is important to understand that there's an emotional aspect to eating. And so I talked about candy in the previous portion on stress, but as I sort of dove deeper into this over the last few months, I found it really interesting. So there's evidence in research to suggest that negative self-talk, again, which is the opposite of self-compassion, is part of a cycle that stimulates your basal ganglia in the brain to release dopamine. And so dopamine is that sort of pleasure reward hormone that leads to habit formation and addiction. So that's kind of crazy to think about is that we can literally become addicted to negative self-talk. And again, a lot of people have that, and it's very important to be aware of that and try to minimize that. And so how do we fix that? Well, we start by staying aware, right? Being mindful. So as you go through your normal activities, stay aware of your thoughts, the thoughts that pass through your mind, especially when you make a mistake or you find yourself feeling negative about a situation. So again, Candy, different scenarios throughout the day, calling herself a fat ass while she's eating, depending on what she's eating or how much she's eating, or if she's snacking between meals, etc., etc. So again, you need to work to parse that out and notice those things. And so going back to the little technique we steal from meditation, the naming and noting, once you do that, you can ask yourself, okay, what are the thoughts I'm having? Do I believe those thoughts? And do those thoughts create a feeling in my body? And so if those thoughts feel self-compassionate, great, keep doing it. If they don't, try to restrain that negative self-talk, realizing that you just committed negative self-talk, and instead try practicing some self-compassion. So the other side of the sort of psychological equation here is willpower. And so willpower is a pretty interesting concept. There's some research that shows that it's finite and some that shows that it may not be. But one thing that we do know from research is that it appears to be surprisingly simple to boost willpower. And so merely suggesting to people that willpower works in a cumulative way rather than being a finite resource was enough to improve the numbers. And so an interesting kind of prompt that they used in the study was to telling people, hey, sometimes working on a strenuous mental task can make you feel energized for further challenging activities. That's literally what they said, which seems pretty easy. And I wouldn't say it's going to work like a charm every time you kind of use that line, because your clients and their mental states will vary and how they kind of receive input will vary, but that's super low risk and potentially high reward to kind of let them know, hey, look, sometimes when you get the ball rolling, it will continue to roll and get easier to roll and sort of have this snowball effect. And so you can look at willpower in a couple of different ways. You know, some examples that I have is I will sometimes often ask someone, let's say they're having a hard time with late night snacking. And so they may say, hey, look, every night I can't keep from going to the pantry and grabbing the chips or making a bowl of ice cream or whatever it may be. And so there's a little habit we call sitting with it. And so what sitting with it means is that you would say, okay, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. You're going to go to the pantry. You're going to get whatever snack that you were going to eat. You're going to go back to the couch, sit in front of the TV like you probably were going to do anyways. And then you're going to try to sit that snack right beside you and not touch it. And so you're going to sit there with it until you feel like, okay, I'm good, I don't want it, and then go put it away. And so you might get some resistance with ice cream in that scenario, but chips, cookies, anything like that, it's a very valuable experience to let someone see that how willpower does sort of build on itself, because those first few seconds will be the hardest, and then that first minute gets easier, the next 5 minutes will get easier, the next 10 minutes, however long they sit there with it, will get easier, to the point where they say, oh, I'm in control of this situation, I do have the willpower to say no, I'm going to go put that back up. It doesn't have to be that is a little bit of a sort of removal, which is not ideally where we start with people, but if their main goal is to stop late night snacking, that would be a good way to sort of work through that scenario. So you may be saying, okay, well, what about the food? And yes, at the end of the day, the food does matter, obviously. And so without getting too deep, we'll talk about some of that and how you can help people kind of navigate that area. So I'll say JB's Big Three. JB is John Berardi. He's one of the co-founders of Precision Nutrition. And so JB's Big Three, a simple guide to making every kind of diet work. It's just 3 easy steps. 1, prioritize whole foods. That means foods that occur naturally in nature. So, did it grow? If it grew, then that is a whole food. 2, don't eat too much, just being mindful of how much food you're putting into your body. And then a satisfying mix of plants and animals. You'll find a lot of people now who are more vocal that they don't want to eat meat or animal products for a number of different reasons. The more you kind of talk to people too, you'll find a lot of people, they just maybe don't eat a lot of meat. So that's okay. You can kind of, again, meet them where they're at and help guide them in the right direction. And so I think if you take these steps and you flip them upside down to sort of form a pyramid, then you've got a successful start to make change. So let prioritizing whole foods be sort of the base. And so it's important to remember there's no single best way to eat. You will hear that quite often. Keto is the way to go. Plant-based is the way to go. Whatever else out there that somebody could potentially sell you in a multi-level marketing scheme. Some people, yes, will respond better to a low-carb diet. Some will also do better on a high-carb diet. It doesn't matter. You can make it work if you prioritize whole foods, if you don't eat too much, and if you just sort of balance out the plant-animal mix however they want to do it. So again, prioritizing whole foods. This is usually a sort of breakdown that I give to people when they're not totally sure about what consists of a whole food, or they don't understand why food processing is not great. And so I'll always use the kind of apple to applesauce to apple juice to apple gummies scenario of, if you take a whole apple and you process it into apple sauce, somewhere along the line there you've lost nutrients. And then if you take that applesauce into apple juice, again, then you've removed a lot of the fiber. And then if you take that apple juice into an apple gummy that may contain 5 or 10% juice, then again, now we are so far away from what an apple is that the nutrition value is almost nil. And so, humans are meant to eat foods that were close to their natural source for a variety of reasons. And so the most important reason is the less processing, the higher the nutrient density in the food. Meaning, again, like we just talked about with the apple, the further we get away from how it naturally grew, the less healthy it's going to be. So, if someone is younger in their nutritional age and struggles with shopping, struggles with cooking skills, then I'll ask them, okay, let's try one of two things. We can try, you go to the grocery and shop normally. Don't change anything. Just if you use a list or don't use a list, go buy like you normally would for you, your family, and then lay everything out on the belt at a cashier. And so everything that the cashier rings, you've got to quickly in your head tell yourself or ask yourself, did it grow or was it made? And then you just go. Every item they go quickly, grown, made, grown, made. Again, if it grew, we know that that's a whole food. If it was made, it's in some way been processed. And so again, there's different levels of processing, and how much something is processed can kind of affect the nutrient quality of the food. And so the other way would be, okay, go to the grocery store and you can only buy foods that grew. And then from those foods, see what you can make. And so again, food preparation skills are a major hurdle for people. They just simply don't know how to prepare a lot of foods. So if they need to, just have them try one new vegetable or one type of protein or one simple recipe over the weekend. If you do need to improve your culinary art skills, Epicurious has a 42-minute YouTube video showing you how to cut up like every single vegetable you could find. I've linked it in the PowerPoint, or you can just go to YouTube, search how to chop every vegetable in Epicurious. And so the video is divided up into little bitty sections. You can just hover the mouse over it and it will pop up and show you what vegetable that is in that section of the video. So they have that for vegetables. They also have the same thing for how to slice up every fruit. So this could be a really helpful resource for somebody, again, if you've kind of tasked them with, hey, why don't we try to just incorporate one new vegetable or one new fruit this week? So I've added these two graphics here. You can see the one on the left is different examples of whole versus highly processed foods, different grains like brown rice, from brown rice moving to white rice, moving to rice puff cereal, meat and poultry. It may be a baked whole chicken, then a rotisserie chicken, then chicken nuggets, nuts. Shelled peanuts would be whole. Peanut butter is processed. Peanut butter cookies would be highly processed. And so if you look to the right here, the beneficial nutrients, we've got a fast food burger with fries compared to a 6-ounce tenderloin, baked potato, broccoli. You can see basically the whole food is going to win in every single category. And some of the categories such as iron, vitamin A, vitamin C, fiber, it is double, if not more, than the sort of processed counterpart. And it's also going to have less calories. So that is, again, doubly important because we're basically getting more for less. If you think of calories are money, nutrients are what you get. For a lot of calories, you don't get much with the fast food burger with fries. For about half as much money, you get a whole lot more with the steak, baked potato, and broccoli. So when I talked about JB's Big Three and talked about flipping that upside down into informing your pyramid, think about your environment is the foundation. So Berardi's first law states, if a food is in your house or possession, either you or someone you love or someone you marginally tolerate will eventually eat it. So we live in the most calorically rich time in human history, which is a problem because the foods that we have that are readily available to us are engineered to taste exceptional while also not being filling, and they don't go stale for months at a time. So again, when you go to the grocery and you ask yourself, was it made? You think about a Dorito. A bag of Doritos can last a really long time, and when you sit down and eat them, you can sort of mindlessly eat them for a long period of time before you'll start to feel full. So again, that's been engineered by scientists that work for Frito-Lay to make it that way. And so for that reason, it's important to use your at-home and at-work environments to set your client up for success. So help them understand that they don't need to necessarily throw away a bunch of food that they currently have, but instead maybe just practice replacing items with a healthier item to make one little step in the right direction. So that could be, okay, let's instead try, instead of white bread this week, we're just going to move to wheat. And then from wheat, maybe we move to whole grain. Whatever protein options they like. If it's an animal product, let's see if we can get a leaner cut. Let's see if we can add more variety, have some healthy ready-made options if they need to lean on, frozen foods that they can just microwave. Frozen vegetables are great. There are a number of different even frozen single meal items available on the market that are relatively inexpensive. And again, you don't want to build your whole diet around that, but again, having that could be a big swing in terms of, oh, well, I don't have anything, I'm just going to run out and get something from McDonald's or Wendy's. And so lastly, the most important part of environment, family is environment, and they'll need support from those around them to have success. And so that is one of the kind of crucial conversations that you may have to have with somebody, is to say, is your husband on board with this? How do your kids eat? All of the people living in your house, that matters, because if parents are used to bringing home certain foods for their kids, or only cooking certain things because that's the way their wife eats or that's the way their husband eats, some of their habits might have to change to support them. Trying not to eat too much. So a good rule of thumb is to try to eat until you're 80% full, because often we eat too much before we know we ate too much. So that's kind of like a oops moment. But once it's there, and it's done. So that happens because the hormones that regulate hunger, ghrelin tells us we're hungry, leptin tells us we're full. And so again, the problem is with hormones is they don't work instantly. And so they have to travel through the body to get to our brain, get to our gut, communicate to one another and say, hey, this is how we're doing, we're good, we can slow down. And so again, 5,000 years ago, this isn't a problem when we're sort of on foot looking for food day in and day out and not eating a ton. Or if we do have the chance to overeat, it's okay because we're getting a certain amount of exercise and other activity during our day. In 2021, it's a problem. And so we can use some habit-based approaches to help people become more in tune with their bodies and give them some increased awareness. So trying to eat your 80% full is the one I kind of go with the most. Another one you can do is to sort of say, hey, how about when you go out to eat or when you're eating at work or wherever, put your fork or spoon down, if you're picking your food up, put it down in between bites, and you don't pick it back up until you're done chewing. So again, it seems kind of dumb, but just try it for yourself when you're out eating. Pick your fork up, take a bite, sit your fork down, and don't start on the next bite until you're all the way done chewing and have swallowed. Another one would be, all right, try taking a drink of water between every 2 or 3 bites. You can count your chews. Sit there, kind of count your chewing, chew it 15, chew it 20 times, and have them kind of focus on the flavors and the texture of what they're eating while they're eating it. And so that may not be a forever goal to count your chews, but it might work for them each week, especially if they have a particular meal where they tend to notice that they sort of eat all at once because they feel like they're really, really hungry. So that would be kind of your classic, I've got an hour for lunch, but I finish my lunch in 15 minutes, and then I'm maybe bored or just waiting around. So then I kind of just sort of graze on some other things because why not? I've got some free time to kill. Or even if you're out to eat, just in the middle of your meal, getting up and going to the bathroom, even if you don't have to, just to kind of give yourself a few minutes to sort of pause there and let things settle before you go back to finish that meal. Another area that you may choose to help someone eat a little bit better would be to increase the variety in the foods that they eat, or more simply put, just eat the rainbow. A lot of people struggle with variety in their diet. They tend to lean on foods that they know they like and are a little bit fearful of trying new things. Again, think back to the culinary skills that are sometimes required to prepare certain vegetables or fruits. So a game that I'll play with people is have them say, all right, keep a 3 or 5 day food log, bring it in, and what we're going to do is basically place everything you eat into categories based on the color. And so I played this with a girl named Morgan. She was a collegiate runner who we had been seeing for therapy, but also some things didn't really add up, and we thought, okay, she was having some pelvic floor issues, but also some abdominal tightness, and after digging a little deeper, had some GI issues with bloating, constipation, those type of things. And so what we found was she tended to eat a lot of processed foods and a lot of foods that fell under what I would call like white or yellow. So pasta, chicken nuggets, French fries. Not a lot of green produce, not a lot of red, not a lot of purple, anything like that. So what we did was we took that information. I had her come in again the next week and said, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to have some produce for you that I will prepare over the weekend when I'm preparing my own food, and I'll just set a little bit aside of some fresh stuff that's kind of easy to cut up, and we'll microwave it in some Ziploc steamer bags. I'll also bring a few frozen medleys. So again, pop it in the microwave. It requires no culinary skills and also offers you the opportunity to eat a variety of different things. So we did that, and what we found was, of all the things she tried that day, broccoli was sort of her favorite. And I wouldn't say she loved it, but she, again, it was marginally tolerable. She was like, yeah, I could eat that. I probably wouldn't pick it over and over again, but I could do it. And so when someone hasn't tried something, but they can say they can eat it a little bit, then I'll run with that, because I think that if you sort of add that into your diet over time, you will sort of grow to like it. So her habit goal was a fist-size serving of broccoli 4 days a week. Just one fist, either at lunch or dinner, and it's got to be at least 4 days a week. She was able to nail that for 2 weeks in a row. What we did then was take that then to the next level and say, okay, it's two fists with size, and again, able to do that. So why that's valuable is not just for Morgan, but for anyone that you're working with. It is far easier to add food to the way you currently eat as opposed to take things away because of issues around cognitive restraint. I think many of us are aware that if someone tells us, okay, you can no longer eat this, or you can no longer eat after this time, when they're normally used to eating that way, it will sort of ramp up their desire to eat whatever you're taking away from them. So as far easier to add food in. And again, you can lose weight by eating more vegetables, and then we'll talk about how that protein too in a little bit. So one other, I guess, way you could do this is to encourage clients to, if they're already used to cooking for their family, or used to, maybe they're one of these people who they sort of meal prep, or they usually take their lunches to work, encourage them to say, okay, well, let's make sure that the plate has 3 or 4 different colors, and that can be food that you cooked or if you go out to eat. In terms of what I have people track from a numeric standpoint, protein is the only thing, and I say that because it is the most important macronutrient. Carbohydrates are the most popular macronutrient because of things like the Atkins diet or Prove It, which is a ketogenic diet. So that is your low carb, high protein, high fat. Those things are successful in the short term with a lot of people because carbohydrates are stored with water in the body. So when you significantly reduce the amount of carbohydrates you're used to intaking, you will lose a large amount of water weight in a very short period of time. That's what bodybuilders do to get ready for shows. Bodybuilders, though, are very aware that it is a short-term way of eating. They're not going to continue to do that. Most people do not think that way when they sign up for Atkins or they sign up for Prove It. And that is detrimental, because that is when we lose a significant amount of weight very, very quickly. Our brain interprets that as starving and as if we're like in a famine. So think about, you hear all the time, I got on this diet, I did it for 2 or 3 months, I lost, 25, 30 pounds really quickly, but then I sort of gave up on it. It was getting too hard. I didn't like having to count all this stuff, and I sort of just drifted back to eating the way I was eating before, and I gained all that weight back plus some. So again, your body thinks, I just spent 2 or 3 months starving, I lost all this weight. What I'm going to do is prepare myself for that the next time it might come, and the next time I'll be more ready by having more weight, more fat stores available. So again, if I'm going to have someone track any of their macronutrients, it's protein. A general recommendation is 0.36 gram per pound, or if you're training, it might be somewhere between like 0.64 to 0.9. Again, I try not to get too hung up in the numbers too much. I just use that as a general estimate really quickly if I don't have access to Precision Nutrition's macro calculator, which we'll talk about in the next slide. So if you sort of type these numbers in and do a little bit of math, what you'll find is a lot of people are pretty shocked at how little protein they get based on either these recommendations or the recommendations in the macro calculator, especially females. So I've actually had a number of different females who, again, their one and only habit was, we need to increase your protein intake, and what they noticed is they lose weight. Quick example, there was a lady named Wendy in Illinois who was referred to me by Jordan, and what I had Wendy do is, again, fill out the intake. We sort of talked through that. She was not really concerned with losing weight, but was concerned with her performance for triathlon. She had signed up for an Ironman. She wanted to make sure she didn't get hurt, or at least minimize her chance of getting hurt while also improving her performance. So any male or female that comes to me with those goals, I'm going to probably jump towards, okay, well, we need to look at your protein intake and we probably need to up it. And so, again, we did that. We had her track that. I think she did like a 5-day or a week food journal, came back with those numbers. We typed her stuff into Precision Nutrition's macro calculator. She was quite a ways off from where they would have told her to be. So we just sort of started small, saying, okay, this says, you need to be at 180 grams per day. You're only hitting like 80 to 100. So again, that's a pretty good ways off. I wouldn't ask her 180 grams. I would tell her, that's an A++. We don't need to make an A++. We need to just get to a B. So that might mean, can we get 20 or 30 more grams per day? That's just, a palm-sized portion of chicken or fish, or maybe adding in a protein shake, something really, really pretty simple that she felt like she could do day in and day out. So she does that. We met about 3 or 4 weeks later. And after that, over that time, she had 2 big things to report back. One, she felt a lot better during training, and she was also kind of sheepishly was like, I kind of lost like 5 pounds too, which she was like, I'm not trying to lose weight, but it just happened. And so that's valuable because losing weight, it will make you faster during a bike and run portion of a triathlon. And then it kind of encouraged her to realize like, oh, wow, if I eat differently, I could maybe actually get down closer to like my college weight as opposed to where I am now. So again, not something that she kind of came to the table saying she wanted to do, but she was pleased with that byproduct. In terms of Precision Nutrition's macro calculator, I have linked this in the PowerPoint and the email, and we'll kind of run through what that looks like when you use that. And so it's going to give you a wealth of information. It will give their caloric and macronutrient needs based on a series of simple kind of individualized questions, height, weight, what do they do for work, what does their exercise look like throughout a week. And then it'll basically spit out and say, all right, here's what we kind of ballpark based on the information that you've given us. And so, again, I don't ever have anyone track calories. I will only use this for protein estimates. And I say that because tracking calories is sort of a futile exercise, meaning most people don't know that when you pick up something at the store and look on the nutrition label and say, I'll use just like 100-calorie pack of crackers or cookies or whatever. That is just an estimate on the number of calories that are actually in that bag. If you were to take the whole entire box and put them all into testing in a laboratory and say, okay, how many calories are actually in the bag, you would find a wide variety. And I say wide, the FDA just says whatever you put on the label, that has to be right within like a 50% window, meaning it can be actually be 25% more than that, or it can be 25% less for that. And the same goes for produce. Obviously, not every single apple or every single banana or every single head of broccoli is going to have the same amount of calories. And so you think back to the graphic before that sort of showed the amount of calories with a steak, a potato, and broccoli compared to a burger and fries. The uptake of those calories is going to be different because of all of the other nutrients that are available in the whole foods. You're also going to just end up with far less calories in whole foods. They're not as processed, and those calories are not sort of uptaken in the body in the same way because of the sugar and other processed carbs that are in the processed foods. So I try to explain that to people and educate them that, look, it's probably not worth your time to even count your calories or be too worried about it. And again, it's a 2,000 calorie diet definitely doesn't fit everyone based upon their own size, their activity levels through their job, or if they're exercising. So I'll pull up this calculator from the Precision Nutrition's website, and we'll sort of walk through it together, and I'll show you what it looks like. We follow the hyperlink in the PowerPoint. It's going to bring us to this web page, the Ultimate Macro Calculator. We can scroll down and select Get Started. The first question it'll prompt you with is this for yourself or is this for a client? I'm going to go through this exercise as if it's for myself in real life, and then I'll kind of walk it back and we'll select a few different variables to show how it may look different based on if it was a client and what their goals may be. First thing it's going to ask me is about my age, then about my biological sex, how tall I am, and how much I currently weigh. Then it's going to ask you what is your goal. So this is where it starts to get a little more individualized. Again, my goal would be athletic performance here. You may have someone who wants to lose weight, or if these people come to you and they say they just want to feel better but they don't want to weigh themselves or track their weight, I may go with a body recomposition or the improve health categories. A young athlete, it may be something like build muscle. Next, what's your preferred eating style? So remember, any of these eating styles can work and be effective as long as we stick to our principles of prioritizing whole foods and not eating too much, and then whatever mix of plants and animals you want to do from there. So for me personally, what that looks like is selecting the anything category, but it was going to look a lot different if I select ketogenic. I'll show you here in just one second. So from here, it's going to ask, do you want to use anything's standard macronutrient ratio? I always just use the standard. So for anything, that's 30% protein, 35% carb, 35% fat. Again, if I were to select something different like ketogenic, you can see how that changes quite a bit to 20% protein, 10% carbs, 70% fat. If I were to eat vegetarian, kind of the same, 30% protein, 35% carb, 35% fat. So I'm going to select anything. We'll go next. Use this standard breakdown. How many meals a day do you eat? Say 3. And describe how active you are each day. So this is, again, talking sort of about your work and what that looks like. So for me, I'm going to say that's continuous, gentle to moderate activity. Moving around most of the day, but not anything really strenuous in terms of work. What best describes your weekly workouts? So for me, personally, if I'm in the middle of a heavy training block, say getting ready for a longer race next May, I will have very intense, so 7+ hours of exercise each week, probably starting in December. And then it's going to give you my results. So a brief summary of everything we entered here at the top. Then you can scroll down, and the first number that's going to pop out is the calories per day. Almost double what you'll read on the back of a nutrition label because of the goals that I wrote for myself and the amount of movement I'm getting not only during work, but also from exercise. And so what I commonly use this for is this protein per day. So 192 grams, that's a very big number when you start to count, start to count just a little bit to see how much you're actually getting per day. And this is where I often go with this calculator with people just to show them, look, this is kind of what we need to increase likely, both to benefit you from a weight loss perspective or from an athletic performance perspective. And so what I want to show you that is, let's go backwards. And let's say I want to lose weight and I weigh a little more than I do now. So let's say I weigh 185 pounds and my goal is to lose weight. It's going to ask me how much by when. So let's say I want to weigh 165 and I'm going to set a realistic goal for myself. So when we talk about weight loss, 0.5% to 1.5% of your total body weight per week is a reasonable goal. Doesn't mean it's easy, but you would say it's reasonable. You can lose more. It will be uncomfortable for that person and likely not sustainable. And you can definitely lose less than that too, but the person has to kind of understand that they're not really going at it probably as hard as they could. So when do I want to weigh that by? Let's say my goal is to weigh that by January 1st of 2022. Preferred eating style is going to say the same, anything. Still using that standard macronutrient ratio. And still staying with 3 meals a week. Let's say my job is the same, but my exercise is a little bit less. Let's say 3 to 4 hours of moderate exercise. So you can see here, my calories dropped significantly down to 2,400, but if you notice, my protein actually went up. So again, it's really hard to gain weight when you're prioritizing really lean, good sources of protein. Again, 200 grams, a very big number. Someone's going to often feel very full eating that way, but also be able to lose weight. So I think it's very interesting from that regard to kind of use this for the protein number specifically. From before, my portion sizes of veggies stay the same, my carbs and fats drop. So again, you're having someone starting to eat a large amount of lean protein, a good amount of veggies. They're likely setting themselves up for success to lose weight. So now we see how the Precision Nutrition's macro calculator works. In this next break we've got coming up, take a little time and play around with that, have some fun with it, see what it says for you, and then maybe theoretically someone you know that might be a client. So we have to come to this point where we talk about how do we actually create change, and hitting back on it, we need to set realistic habit goals for our clients. And so even if that calculator were to say I needed 192 grams of protein, but let's say I'm only usually getting around 115, that doesn't mean we can't take a step in the right direction and start to get 130, because that would be realistic for me. Whereas to say, hey, jump right to that 192 number, and if you don't meet that, well, then you're failing, right? So a lot of these plans or diets that people go on, again, it's too much good stress right away. And so they may have success for 2, 3, let's say even 6 weeks at a time, but likely that's not sustainable. And we need to set up habits that are going to last a lifetime. So we're going to try it for ourselves. During this next break, you'll have about an hour. Go through the initial assessment and triage questionnaire, fill it out for yourself and then look back on it as if you were coaching you. From that, try to make 3 habit-based goals that would be appropriate that you could start tomorrow. So again, when we say appropriate, it's actionable, it's measurable, and you're a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 on that ready, willing, and able scale. Also play around with the macro calculator and see what you think. Hey everybody, welcome back. We're going to finish with the final section of the presentation, sleep and patient care. We want to start with some general recommendations for sleep. For adults, that looks like 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night with a consistent schedule in terms of what time you're going to bed and then what time you're waking up. You want to keep your environment dark and cool, so think about setting your thermostat to 67 as a starting point and seeing how well you like that. And then avoid staying in bed or checking the clock if you can't sleep. So if you wake up kind of earlier than usual in the morning and you can't seem to fall back asleep, just go ahead and get up. I want to jump back to the top though about the 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. So 7 hours of sleep may not seem that detrimental to you if you're going to get less than that. I'm sure plenty of us have gone to work on 5 or 6 hours of sleep. And so sleep research, originally what they would focus on was total sleep deprivation, meaning how long can you stay awake or what happens if you stay awake for 24, 48 hours. However, it's much more common for sleep researchers today to examine the cumulative effects of sleep debt, meaning 1 or 2 hours here or there that gradually add up to impact health from a mental and physical well-being standpoint. So what they found is that just 10 days of 6 hours of sleep per night impairs your mental performance and concentration and responsiveness tests to the same degree as if you stayed up without sleep for 24 hours. So if you can think back to college, maybe if you've ever pulled an all-nighter, how you feel at the end of that is not good. And so you think about how many people are functioning in their daily lives thinking they're doing fine on 6 hours of sleep when really they have so much more potential if they were getting, closer to 8. We also have a lot of known consequences for our health. So we look at sleep deprivation and increased risk of hypertension, diabetes, obesity. Think of all of the people we just talked about in the nutrition portion of this, how sleep could be affecting their weight gain or inability to lose weight. We also have heart disease, kidney disease, stroke, dementia, and Alzheimer's. And then also you have a decreased ability to fight common infections, to fight inflammation, decreased testosterone, decreased growth hormone, and an overall decrease in focus. So we want to dig a little deeper into this relationship between sleep and nutrition. We look at sleeping only 5 or 6 hours when really we know that we need between 7 and 9. What happens is the hormones become a little bit dysregulated. So ghrelin, which triggers our hunger, will tend to rise, making us feel the need to eat more often or larger amounts, while simultaneously leptin falls, so it takes longer to feel full. So you look at that from a physiological standpoint, and you can see how that quickly starts to work against us in a really negative way for our energy balance if we're sleep deprived. You get people who are only getting that 5 or 6 hours a night, and their body feels the need to eat more and more frequently. You also have an endocannabinoid increase, which makes your perception of food seem more pleasurable. So how that kind of presents itself in real life is it makes it hard to avoid the processed carbs when you're sleep deprived. And I would encourage you to try this on yourself. It's been really eye-opening for me just kind of reading about this, especially the perception of food being different and how your cravings are affected. I will notice now far more often that if I didn't get a great night's sleep, or I maybe only got 6.5 hours of sleep before work, or on the weekend, the next day, what I feel encouraged to eat or what looks enticing to me is often far more processed foods. And you also, we have a loss of blood flow to the frontal or more rational region of your brain, and more blood flow to the amygdala, which is your emotional portion. And again, eating does have an emotional aspect. However, emotional eating usually doesn't end well for us. We want to look at the relationship between sleep and exercise as well. Research by Malewski in 2014 found that high school athletes were 1.7 times more likely to sustain an injury if they had less than 8 hours of sleep per night. So for me, I kind of think of two situations where I would want to talk with high school or collegiate, maybe even middle school athlete about their sleep. That is, am I seeing someone who is kind of routinely popping back up in the clinic with these little maybe soft tissue injuries? They may be someone when I want to say, hey, what's your sleep like? Ask them some questions, what their sort of sleep hygiene is, and see if we can do anything there that might help them stay healthier throughout the season and they wouldn't need me as much. Or looking at the high school athlete who's already injured and just wants to get back as quick as they can, letting them know, hey, if you're diligent about your sleep, if you're trying to make your time to bed pretty consistent, making sure that you're in bed early enough that you can get 8 hours of sleep before you have to get up for school the next day, this will definitely aid in the process of you getting back to being able to play quicker. You also look at, in real time, less than 6 hours of sleep drops the time to physical exhaustion by 10 to 30%. So your athletes are going to perceive that they're fatiguing a lot quicker because they really are if they're not sleeping well. And then lastly, I think if we kind of expand this out to not just high school aged athletes, but also our general population, there's obviously a greater mental hurdle to exercise when you're feeling fatigued. So if you're not sleeping well and you're feeling tired throughout the day, they're far less likely to want to exercise either before or after work. So again, you commonly hear people say, well, I just don't have the energy to work out after work. I just want to go home and sit on the couch because I'm so tired. And so then you look at their sleep is poor, and that is starting to snowball in terms of their overall health from what we just looked at in terms of the nutrition in the last slide, and then also the likelihood that they are not going to be willing to exercise because of mental fatigue, and then even if they are going to exercise, it becoming riskier to do so. And then thirdly, we want to talk about sleep and pain. So research suggests that a decrease in the number of hours slept has a direct influence on pain sensitivity. So why that's important is, I think it's the sort of initial thing you may think is, oh, well, this person is in pain, so they're not sleeping well. And while that may be true, there's also the other side of the coin, which means this person isn't sleeping well. That's why they're in pain. And research has, again, suggested that there's a direct correlation there between, you're sleeping less. We can test your pain sensitivity. It goes up directly in terms of less hours of sleep. You're far more sensitive to pain. So that can be any of our patients that we're working with, but I think especially those who kind of fall into the chronic pain category of, maybe they've had low back pain or neck pain for several years now, letting them know that being diligent about their sleep habits can have a direct impact on how well they feel the next day. And so when we're talking with this about patients, we want to talk about the dimensions of sleep quality and all 5 of these dimensions. And it's important to discuss all of these and be specific. We don't want to just say, hey, do you sleep okay? Or how much sleep do you get at night? We can look at having them do this little exercise where They rank everything with a 0, 1, or 2, and then we can look at their total score to determine their sleep health. And so again, we're looking at satisfaction. Are you satisfied with your sleep? Your alertness. Are you staying awake all day without dozing off? Your timing. Are you asleep between 2 and 4 a.m.? The efficiency. Do you spend less than 30 minutes awake at night? Meaning, are you able to go to bed, lay down, fall asleep relatively quickly? And throughout the night, are you only up for short periods of time for things like having to use the bathroom? And then duration, do you sleep between 6 and 8 hours per day? And so again, that's a low estimate. We know that the research would suggest 7 to 9 hours is where we need to be. So again, a practical application there of what you can use with patients to start to determine how well are you really doing, because their sort of score on this exercise and their subjective reports may be a little bit different. I've also included this worksheet in the email from Precision Nutrition, Sleep and Recovery Ideas. So again, ideas for change and practical approach or habit-based approaches to what can we do to sort of see if we can help you sleep better. And so you can use this as a starting point for what to do in terms of improving their sleep hygiene and making those practices as good as we can. Now that we've finished covering the areas of sleep, nutrition, and stress and how those affect our patients from a deep health vantage point, I want to wrap this up by putting it all together and going back a little bit and talking about how we start to make change with our clients. So the most successful approach to make change is going to involve all of these steps. The first thing is it needs to be collaborative. So together decide on one habit to work on. You may have to check your biases at the door a little bit with this one, but just remember that if the client isn't involved in the decision making, it's very likely that it won't stick because, again, they don't feel nearly as invested. So we're going to choose one thing that we come up with together, and then we're going to focus on just that one thing, not 2 or 3 things at once, but just one at a time, and then we can sort of stack those habits as they go. You also want to make sure that the individual verbalizes that it's something they feel they're a 9 out of 10 on the I think I can do that scale. If they can't consistently, over 90% of the time, do a habit, then we need to make it smaller. Even if it's so small that they may think, well, that's not going to result in any change, it needs to be something that they definitely know that they can do day in and day out. And we want to do this consistently for 2 weeks. And so we need to nail this habit for long enough for it to stick. And so once we've done something for 2 weeks, what we can look to do then is say, all right, are we going to just do this for 2 more weeks and see where it gets us? Or are we going to take this habit that we started with and can we make it now a little bit better? So maybe the client started by saying, I think I can put my phone down 10 minutes before bed every single night. Okay, well, now can we try to make that 15 or 20 minutes before bed? Take the same habit, make it a little bit better, refine it. Or do you stack a new habit on top of an old one? So again, you can continue with the habit, refine it, or add a new one. All of those approaches can work if the client is ready, willing, and able. Lastly, you want to use outcome-based decision making. Just like in the SFMA, we want to test and retest. Check if what you both agreed upon is actually working by asking, how's that working for you? And then responding with, show me. Once you've made the decision-making process collaborative and the individual has shown you that they've been able to do it, then you can decide together if that's actually helping them work towards their goals. So again, you all can do this. I know that some of these topics may be uncomfortable and you won't know how to wade through the conversations, but really the best thing you can do is kind of go out there and get your elbows dirty and dive right in. And again, take some of these worksheets and just have patients do them, even if maybe even you don't plan on having them do anything to make a change. At least get comfortable with bringing the conversations up and starting to figure out how you're going to work through that to help people out. And again, a growth mindset goes a long way here for you personally. I second guess myself all the time, and people think that I know everything there is to know about nutrition or triathlons, and I don't. But again, I try to keep learning all the time, and I try to keep making myself more and more aware of things that I do and don't know, so that I can be more helpful towards others. So I hope that everything we covered today was helpful for you, and you can start to take some of this information and apply it out into the real world to help your patients live a happier and healthier life.